and will later on be posted on the website of the Global Nutrition Cluster. So you can always go back to it and share it, of course, with colleagues and other people that are interested. To the agenda, you can see it in front of you. We will actually start with opening remarks by the host, which is the Global Nutrition Cluster, and the two co-hosts, NORCAP and STC. So we'll hear from Anna, from Stine, and from Philip. Then we will continue with the actual presentation of the evidence and guidance note, so the document that we are officially launching today, followed by a short Q&A on the content of that presentation. And in the second part, we will hear from different actors that have made experiences using cash and vouchers in the field. We'll hear from Action Against Hunger from Nigeria. We'll hear from Save the Children in Colombia. And we'll hear about experiences of developing a guidance document for nutrition practitioners that happened in West Africa in collaboration between CALP, Save the Children, and French Red Cross. And we will close the webinar with a panel discussion with all the presenters. Yeah. So I hope that's okay with you. And without further ado, I would like to welcome the hosts and co-hosts to this event. We have Anna Siołowska, the Deputy Global Nutrition Cluster Coordinator, who I'll give the word in 1 second. We also have from NORCAP, Stine Horn, the Director of the Partnership and Development Section. And from the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, STC, we have Philippe Besson, the head of the multilateral division of the Humanitarian Aid Division. So welcome all. We will start by the order that is displayed here in the agenda. So I would like to give the word to Anna. Anna, please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. It's really nice to see so many people online. I'm really happy to open this official launch of the Cash for Nutrition Outcome Guidance. Some of you may recall that this was our discussion topic during the annual GNC meetings and elsewhere for several years. In 2016, we agreed to add development of the guidance to the next year GNC work plan. However, it took us several years to fundraise for this activity. Finally, in 2019, we were able to secure funding with the generous support of DFID, UNICEF, NORCAP, and SDC. This allowed us to establish a position for a dedicated cash advisor, Andre, who for the past year worked with the GNC Cash Steering Committee, comprised many GNC partners to develop this guidance. While this is a really great milestone and an achievement to celebrate, a lot of yet to be done. We should continue providing leadership and coordination for the Cash for Nutrition outcomes at global and country level, and to update relevant tools and guidance, and where necessary to develop new ones. We should also facilitate the cash and voucher assistance programs at country level. We should document and share best practices and learning how to improve our programming. Should develop and roll out capacity building materials to provide remote and in-country support for implementation of this guidance. And we should work closer with other sectors on the multi-sectoral cash and voucher assistance at both country and global level. So this is just the beginning of a long road ahead. With this, I would like to thank esteemed donor, DFID, UNICEF, NORCAP, and SDC, as well as our partners and other stakeholders who participated in review and drafted materials. Let me especially mention CALP, Save the Children, University College London, World Vision International, Action Against Hunger, GOAL, Cash Cup, UNICEF, UNSCN, Mercy Corps, USAID, WFP, ECHO, ICRC, Concern, TechRRT, Global Health Cluster, Child Protection AOR, and members of the GNCCT. As you see, we had a great collective who worked on this guidance and who is committed to take this work forward. And of course, our very special thanks is to Andre Dur, our GNC Cash advisor, who led this work and will be leading the presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, for these remarks. I would like to hand over directly to Stine Horn. Stine, go ahead. Stine, I think you're on mute.
There. So very nice to see you all. I'm very happy that so many participants could be with us today. So on behalf of NORCAP, we're very pleased to be a co-host of this official launch as well, and welcome you all today. I think that malnutrition continues to pose a major challenge today to human well-being around the world. We know that malnutrition has very severe consequences on children, households, and families. And that also leads to poor learning and health conditions. So we are continuously deepening our learning also on cash and voucher assistance to improve humanitarian and development outcomes, but more is still needed. We are therefore very happy that the Global Nutrition Cluster has taken this leadership on behalf of the sector to explore both possibilities but also limitations on using cash and vouchers in the nutrition response. Together with Anna, I would also just like to express our gratitude also for the support from the donors and also to UNICEF and OFTA who enabled our provision of expertise to the GNC this time around, and also in more general terms to all of our cash cap donors. So that is Swedish CIDA, SDC, NMFA, Germany, ECHO, DFID, and also Belgium. So thank you for this leadership and support to increase the learning around cash and voucher assistance, which I think is really important for us to improve overall our aid responses. NORCAP and CashCap have in the past supported other global clusters with technical expertise to explore CVA. And we did not hesitate to do the same with the Global Nutrition Cluster this time around when we were approached in 2019. I believe that this evidence and guidance note is a very important first step for the nutrition sector to more systematically consider cash and voucher assistance in their response. It is, however, a first step and a lot of lessons are yet to be learned. And I think that it's also now up for nutrition practitioners to use the guidance note. So therefore, I'm also so happy to see so many people present today in this webinar. So on behalf of NORCAP, I wish for a good seminar and also to let you know that we remain very committed to continue supporting the sector on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Stine. Philippe, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much and greetings to all participants. Great to have you on board. I'm also really glad to join this webinar. Looking forward to the presentations and the discussion later on. I try to stay on as long as possible. That's really also a learning occasion for me. The real cash specialist in the unit is, of course, my colleague Stefan. And great to also get the occasion to have also an indirect exchange with you, André, at least through now video means. I think most of you would know that CCA has been engaged in cash for more than 20 years, and there are at least 3 reasons for that. One is that we believe that in terms of delivering aid that is qualitatively high standing, aid that is meaningful, that is responsive to the expressed needs of the people, cash is a great conduit. It's really a means of, and that's the second point, to really take a people-centered approach. And of course, it's also a means to ensure accountability to affected populations, to enhance their situation, to foster their dignity. Those are values which which we see as implicit and explicit in cash-based operations. And of course, closer to the topic of today, we think that the global clusters have an important role to play, like typically the nutrition cluster. We need to decompartmentalize. We need to get rid of silos, and that's why we have endeavored to invest some seed money into cash task teams in a series of global clusters, and the whole purpose is to weave in experience and cash and vouchers assistance ways and means into the work, the more sectoral work we have under the different headings. So this notion of a systemic and more people-centered approach is really central to us. And as I said at the beginning, I'm really looking forward to not only being exposed to the guidance notes, but also hearing from people who are in the field and of their practical experiences. So welcome again, and thanks very much indeed. Over back to André.
Thank you very much, Philippe, Stine, and Anna for these opening remarks. I think that was very helpful. Before we dig into the evidence and guidance note, I would just quickly like to launch two poll questions in order to better understand who is actually on the line. So there's two questions, and you should see them now. And please select the options that best describe your current role. First one is in regards to your technical background. The second one more in regards to your geographical responsibilities. I'll give you 10 more seconds. All right, I'll close it here. And I'm going to show you the results. You should be able to see them now. So the first one was, which of the following options best describes your current role? So we have the majority of people, or the category with the most people, are actually the cash and voucher practitioners, followed by the nutrition practitioners, as well as the nutrition sector / cluster coordinators. And then we have also other people from maybe from other sectors or other functions. And then the second one was, which of the following options best describes your current role in regards to geography? And we see here the most people are actually they have a global role within their organizations, and some a regional one, and about 21% a country level role. Okay, that's great. Now, I'm not shocked that we have more CVA practitioners than nutritionists on the call, because we actually already did an interim launch specifically targeting nutrition practitioners with a bit more technical background as well on CVA concepts. And that's maybe why we have more CVA practitioners on this call today. But you're all very welcome, and thanks for your participation. Good. Okay, so we will continue the agenda with the presentation of the evidence and guidance note. Like I said, if you do have any questions in regards to the content of this presentation or the document that is already online, then please post them in the Q&A and we'll take them up. I think as an introduction, I think there has been a growing recognition within the nutrition sector that cash and voucher assistance can support nutrition outcomes under certain conditions, and a growing interest as well over the last couple of years to better explore that. Now, as Anna has mentioned, cash cap support started in 2019, consisted of me supporting the GNC, as well as we set up a reference group that consisted more than 15 organizations. The reference group basically was tasked to support my work, to provide feedback to what I wrote, and to facilitate contacts and provide documentation. So it is quite a broadly consensus-driven product, at least I hope. The result is the evidence and guidance note. I hope you were able to see it online. Just a quick remark. The design phase is not yet completed, so the document there that you see today is the validated and copy edited version, but the design is ongoing and will be finalized within the next couple of days. Translation to French is also ongoing and will be also then finalized over the next couple of days and weeks. The document consists of an evidence and practice review, which is the basis for kind of the learning and also the guidelines. It is based on more than 50 key informant interviews that were conducted, as well as 2 case studies from Nigeria and Somalia to dig a little bit deeper into projects, into learning, etc. And the document consists mainly of 2 parts. The first one is the evidence note, looking at the evidence base and also trying to identify the most common approaches, how CVA has been integrated so far, and what we learned from that. And the second part is the guidance note, which provides step-by-step guidance to nutrition practitioners on what to consider when integrating CVA into nutrition response. The target audience is primarily nutrition practitioners, including cluster and sector coordinators, but as well cash and voucher practitioners, because we will see later that there's these two sides of the coin. One is really to integrate CVA into nutrition, and the other one is try to better integrate nutrition perspective and nutrition lens into household cash and voucher assistance. Yeah. Great. So part 1, and this is going to be short, so there is much more details obviously in the document itself. Now, what you can see here, and nutrition practitioners will be very familiar with that, is the conceptual framework for child and maternal nutrition on the left, with the different levels from enabling determinants to the underlying, to the immediate determinants, and then to the outcomes. And in principle, I think it's important to understand what CVA can in principle achieve, yeah? Without yet talking about the details of the evidence base. So in principle, CVA allows households and individuals to purchase goods and access services that can have a positive impact on maternal and child nutrition. So we're talking about accessing a healthy and nutritious diet, accessing cooking fuel and equipment, accessing water, safe water, water purification, for example, accessing sanitation and hygiene items, accessing health services as well, paying for transportation services, etc. So these are all things that can have a positive impact on the underlying determinants, which relate to adequate food, adequate feeding, and healthy environment. Then there's, of course, specific design possibilities that CVA brings. One of them is conditional cash, that, for example, can incentivize the participation in nutrition, social, and behavioral change activities, or also the attendance to free priority health services. So these are the 2 most common conditionalities that we see as part of nutrition programming, and the conditional component can actually incentivize participation and uptake of these 2 quite important features, or these 2 important things that contribute to nutrition outcomes. And then the third component is not necessarily related to what people can buy, but it's really related to the increased household income. So the fact that a household has more money in their pocket can actually reduce household tensions, can reduce economic pressure, can enhance decision-making power of women, improve health and well-being of caregivers, etc. So the fact that a household has more money in itself can have positive impacts, especially when it comes, for example, to caregiving and to feeding and other aspects. I'm listing this here as a positive impact on nutrition, although we of course know that CVA can also increase household tensions, etc. but the overall evidence is more in the positive direction. That's why I'm giving it here the positive spin. So that's in principle really how CVA can impact on the underlying determinants. You can see here that the primary impact of CVA is the underlying determinants. It can, under some design circumstances, also impact immediate determinants, but in principle, it addresses the underlying determinants of adequate nutrition. Now here, on the left, you can still see the same framework, and to the right, we can see the level of impact and the strength of evidence of CVA and how it impacts nutrition status, the immediate determinants, and the underlying determinants. And of course, we know that the evidence base isn't perfect, but in many areas it is growing and sometimes already quite solid. For child nutrition status, so talking about chronic and adequate malnutrition and also micronutrient deficiency, there is mixed evidence that CVA has an impact. I think we will come to the reasons why that is and how actually CVA needs to be complemented and designed in order to maximize potential impact on nutrition. But the evidence is mixed and it's also growing. So there's an increasing number of studies, certainly from the development sector, but increasingly also in humanitarian settings, that CVA can or sometimes does not have an impact on nutrition status of children. On dietary diversity of children and health status of children, so immediate determinants, we have mostly positive experience, certainly more on dietary diversity, also it's growing there. On health status, it's still fairly limited. And the strongest evidence base for the impact of CVA on nutrition overall is really on household food expenditure, household food consumption, and dietary diversity, and as well uptake in preventative health services. So I think there we have quite solid evidence that CVA can have a positive impact on these underlying determinants. You also have a growing evidence that cash has a positive impact on intra-household decision-making, as well as being able to reduce intimate partner violence. At least the general trend is in that direction. Doesn't mean that it cannot have the opposite impact as well. And less evidence clearly on aspects of care behaviors, for example, feeding behaviors and practices, as well as psychosocial care for children. There's really no evidence practically. So that's overall the evidence base. It's not perfect, but it's not small enough to use it as an excuse that we shouldn't further continue to explore the potential of CVA as part of nutrition in emergency response. Now, one important consideration when thinking about CVA and nutrition is really to think about demand side and supply side barriers to adequate nutrition. And you can also split these up according to the underlying determinants, which I have not done here, but I've tried to cluster them according to their characteristics. On the demand side, you have economic barriers, which, for example, are related to the affordability of a nutritious diet, of cooking utensils and fuel, hygiene items, safe water and water treatment, etc. All these things that we mentioned before as having a potentially good impact on nutrition outcomes, as well as opportunity costs. So if a caregiver is not able or willing to take the malnourished child to a health facility because the cost of the time that needs to be spent to do that is quite significant, because no money can be earned and other children need to be taken care of, etc. So there's important opportunity costs when it comes to accessing health services as well. And of course, you have behavioral barriers in relation to insufficient knowledge and skills on preparation of nutritious diet, complementary foods, caring practices, wash practices, etc. And we have other demand side barriers, which, for example, are related to markets, or maybe health facilities are not accessible due to distance, safety concerns, cultural elements, etc. And on the supply side, we have everything. So the demand side is more on the household level, really. how people can access key goods and services that are important for adequate nutrition. Supply side is more about the systems that provide these services and these goods. And there, obviously, the markets for food and non-food items are quite important. Their barriers can be related to availability and quality, lack of local production, supply chains that are not properly working. And then also health and nutrition services, obviously, availability, quality as well, of preventative services, as well as treatment of malnutrition, support to infant and young child feeding, availability of therapeutic foods and drugs that are required to treat children with malnutrition, etc. Now, the reason why I'm showing you this is CVA in principle is a valuable tool and a good tool to address economic barriers on the demand side. So CVA primarily acts on the demand side. There's, of course, things that we can do to also stimulate the supply side through a CVA approach, but in principle, other measures are required to address supply side barriers. Yeah. So in principle, CVA acts on the economic barriers to adequate nutrition on the demand side. And another important point here to stress is that, as you can see, the green box is actually quite small, and there's a lot of things that cannot be really addressed with a cash and voucher approach, which also basically brings us to the conclusion that CVA alone is unlikely to actually have an impact on nutrition outcomes, because it can only address economic barriers. So in a situation where economic barriers are the most important ones, maybe by providing CVA alone, or maybe with some supplementary measures, you can have an impact. But usually the barriers are in other areas as well, certainly of behavioral nature and on the supply side. So in order to have an impact, it's important to understand the barriers, understand the contribution of CVA, and then design programs that try to address these barriers in a comprehensive manner. And that is not just by giving cash, that is really integrated or complementary programming, cash plus, some organizations also call it. Good. And these interventions, obviously, they can be nutrition sensitive, so addressing the underlying determinants. They can also be nutrition specific, so addressing the immediate determinants. Okay, so the evidence note, also based on a review of studies and operational examples, identifies 5 main approaches to integrate CVA in a nutrition response. Yeah. The first one is using CVA modalities for either household or for household assistance and or individual feeding assistance. Yeah. So cash and voucher modalities can in principle be used for both components. Certainly for household assistance, you already know that cash in many contexts is really providing the backbone of the household assistance wherever markets are functional. For individual feeding assistance, which traditionally is done through specialized nutritious foods, CVA can be used, but with limitations. And I'm not going to go into more detail here because it is all better described in the actual evidence note. Yeah. But we of course have to be careful as well, not to think that simply by giving money people will necessarily get the right amount of nutrients in the right density, etc. Then a second consideration is really, or something that has worked quite well in a few examples, is providing household cash, so the household assistance through cash transfers, plus specialized nutritious foods as an individual feeding component. This is something that has worked well. And also we have several organizations have made positive experiences with fresh food vouchers as the individual feeding component. So this is also something that we have quite a lot of positive experiences. A second approach is pairing household cash and voucher assistance with context-specific social and behavioral change. So this is an approach that has worked fairly well, I would say, quite well in a lot of contexts. And we have quite a few studies that document the positive impacts of combining these two, and also that seem to suggest that the two components actually mutually reinforce each other. So the SPC, what people learn in social and behavioral change activities often requires actually money to implement. So they learn about a nutritious diet, a healthy diet, and they learn about other behaviors that are required, but then if they go home and don't have money actually to put that into practice. So there actually a cash and voucher component can help them to put these learnings and these skills into practice, while of course the SPC intervention increases the chances that the cash, particularly the cash, but maybe also the voucher, is directed to expenditures that are relevant for nutrition outcomes, so for child and maternal nutrition. Yeah. We have a lot of positive experiences here, which also leads to the conclusion, an important conclusion within the evidence note, that CVA modalities that aim to contribute to nutrition outcomes need to be accompanied with context-specific SPC activities. So that's a real must, I would say. Third approach, which is providing conditional cash transfers to incentivize attendance to priority health services. This is something that has worked well, certainly in development context, but also increasingly we see from studies in humanitarian contexts that conditional cash transfers can improve attendance to these priority health services. So they're called priority health services because they have a proven impact on maternal and child nutrition. Yeah. And at the same time, they can also provide household income, which allows people to make the required expenditures on food, on non-food, etc. A third approach, which is already used quite frequently but poorly documented, is to provide cash and voucher assistance to facilitate access to treatment services. So it's often money or vouchers provided for transportation, specifically to access treatment services, but it could also be cash or vouchers to cover the costs if, for example, a caregiver needs to stay with a child if the child requires inpatient treatment. So certainly for transportation, this is something quite frequently used during the referral stage, but not very well documented. So more needs to be done to document that practice and the learning that is coming out from it. And the last approach that we have seen in different contexts is to provide household cash and voucher assistance to caregivers of SAM children who bring their child for treatment. Yeah. So there, one study strongly suggests that CVA can improve treatment outcomes. Yeah. So the fact that people go home and they get regular cash assistance over a certain period of time has led to a reduced relapse and non-response to treatment, and has improved recovery of those households and children that received the cash. But we also know that there is anecdotal evidence for the perverse incentive of providing cash to caregivers of SAM children, meaning that there is anecdotal evidence that some caregivers make or keep their children malnourished in order to be able to access the assistance. And also for this approach, there's more learning that needs to be done in order to explore these challenges but also these positive results. Now, these 5 approaches, of course, they can be combined with each other. They can be a component of a broader nutrition response as well. Yeah. And I think we'll see later on from Nigeria, when we hear the presentation about the Integrated Nutrition Response Plus, that we see different approaches actually integrated into that program. Yeah. Good. Let me quickly make a time check. I think we're good. I will continue with the part 2, which is the guidance note. Yeah. And as already mentioned, the guidance note has a first important component, which takes most of the space, and which is related to how to incorporate cash and voucher assistance into nutrition response. And the second component is how to apply a nutrition lens to a cash-based response. So they're really not the same thing, but of course there's a lot of overlap. Yeah. So the first one is really for nutrition practitioners when they program, how can they consider and use cash and voucher modalities? And the second one is for maybe an ongoing or a planned basic needs cash response. What kind of measures can we take in order to apply a stronger nutrition lens to that cash-based response? Yeah. Both important considerations. The first one maybe more for the nutrition practitioners. The second one also very important for the cash and voucher. Certainly for the basic needs cash and voucher people out there. Good. So we start with the first one, and we see here different steps that are required to incorporate cash and vouchers into a nutrition response. And I'm just going to go through them one by one and then explore them over the next couple of slides as well. So step one is to determine whether the CVA can contribute to nutrition outcomes. And that's certainly related to an analysis of the causes and the barriers to adequate nutrition, and an understanding what role CVA could potentially play. The second step, once it is confirmed that there is a role to play, is really to determine the feasibility of CVA as part of a nutrition response. Then to determine and select response options and response modalities. So CVA should then, of course, be considered if it's feasible. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best response modality. So that needs to be determined in the response analysis process. Step 4 is in regards to the design of the CVA component. So what design features are available, and also what is the learning in regards to these design features in order to contribute to nutrition outcomes. Step 5, mobilize resources for the response. Step 6, implementation. Step 7, monitoring. And then we have a couple of transversal issues in relation to preparedness, coordination, information management, and risk analysis and mitigation. Yes, so for all the nutritionists out there, don't be scared. This might look a little bit overwhelming in terms of additional things that need to be done, but I think it's important to understand that CVA is part of mainstream humanitarian response, and wherever you are, maybe with a very few exceptions, there is ongoing cash and voucher activities. There is market assessments that are ongoing or have already been completed for food, for non-food, etc. There is feasibility studies out there, etc. So there are a lot of information that you require as a nutritionist to go through, to take the, especially the first couple of steps to come to the conclusion whether you can use CVA. Actually, you can rely on secondary information and information that might be coordinated within the cash working group. So I think that's something important to understand. The second thing where I feel there's often confusion is in regards to the design of implementation of cash and voucher assistance. So there is obviously cash and voucher specialists or advisors that are out there, but they are not necessarily the ones that implement the response. It's organizations that implement the response. So there's logistics department involved, there's procurement involved, there's ICT involved, and there's M&E involved, there's program involved, etc. So I think that's something important to keep in mind. It's organizations that design and implement, it's not the cash specialists. Good. So step 1, determine whether CVA can contribute to nutrition outcomes. And there, as already mentioned, the entry point is demand-side economic barriers to adequate nutrition. So we need to understand the barriers as a whole, but also certainly the economic, like the importance of the economic barriers to adequate nutrition in order to determine whether cash and vouchers can be an important component of a response. And nutrition assessments by themselves, they are not necessarily geared to collect economic barriers to adequate nutrition, but certainly many of them have opportunities to or have already kind of an angle on that, or there's opportunities maybe to add or tweak certain questions, etc. That is covered in more detail in the guidance note itself. So which tools offer which opportunities to look at economic barriers, which nutrition assessment tools. Then of course there is other assessment tools out there from other sectors, from food security, livelihood, from health, from WASH, from protection. Maybe to mention the household economic analysis as one important tool, and the cost of the diet tool, that is also an important one. But certainly from the food security perspective, has a lot of valuable information for a nutrition response as well. Then the second step, to determine the feasibility of CVA, really classical feasibility assessment stuff, so market capacity and functionality. For a nutrition response, of course, it depends a bit which angle the CVA takes and which objectives you want to achieve with it. But traditionally or typically, you would need to look at food markets, so the availability of nutritious foods, and also non-food items that are relevant for nutrition. If CVA aims also to improve access to health services, then you need to look at these health services and also transportation services if people cannot access them by foot, for example. Delivery mechanisms, you need to look at, of course, community considerations, preferences, safety, household decision making, potential household tensions, etc., etc. And there, of course, the main target audience for a nutrition response are pregnant and lactating women and children. So they're really the most vulnerable, members within a household typically. That's why I think all aspects of protection need to be carefully looked at also already at the feasibility stage. Then additional components, as with other cash responses, acceptance of authorities, the organizational capacity to deliver CVA, risks and costs need to be looked at. And as I mentioned before, most information is probably already available. Yeah. So it's extremely important that you consult with others, with other sectors, as well as cash practitioners, cash working groups that are most probably available in the context that you work. Step 3, determine and select the response options and modalities. I think something important to keep in mind is that CVA does not change the way nutrition practitioners define objectives and select nutrition response options in order to address identified nutritional needs. That is still done in the same way. What CVA does is that it adds options on how these responses can be implemented. Yeah? So it adds, at the level of modality, it adds additional options that need to be considered. And as a rule of thumb, if important economic barriers, if in your context you observe important economic barriers to the underlying determinants, then feasible CVA modalities and approaches should be considered as part of the response options analysis. It's not about that they should be selected, no, they should be considered. And then based on the analysis, the best response option, the best response modalities should be selected. Step 4, design of the CVA component. A couple of considerations here. Targeting, conditionality, time, duration, frequency, and expenditure basket and transfers. Targeting, again here, CVA does not necessarily change the way that a nutritional response targets. Yeah? Targeting of nutrition is typically for prevention done based on at-risk groups, and for treatment it's done based on status. Yeah. But of course, if you have an important household component, there is flexibility to add maybe socioeconomic targeting criteria into the response as well. Conditionality, an important consideration there, of course. Conditionality can be considered if the intent, or if the condition, or if the conditionality itself is likely to increase the attendance in social and behavioral change activities, or is likely to increase the uptake in preventative health services. Yeah. and there's different ways to go about the design of the conditionality, to be more strict, to be more soft, etc. That is explored in more detail in the guidance note. Timing, duration, and frequency, important. Timing, of course, extremely important if events or if crises are predictable, related to seasonality. Certainly duration and frequency. I think we should, in general, it takes time to impact on nutrition outcomes, so one-off transfers are really not recommended as part of a nutrition response. I think ideally duration is really extended, and in principle also what the evidence says is that the longer you provide assistance and the higher the cumulative support that you provide at household level or at individual level, the better the impact on nutrition. That's something important to keep in mind. Expenditure basket and transfer amount, also very important. Depends a lot on the objective of the response, the composition of the basket and the amount that you transfer. So if you want to give access to a nutritious diet, the amount will be different than just simply paying for transportation costs, obviously. But certainly if expenditure baskets that look at nutritional needs, at food needs of households, they in principle should be based on a nutritious and healthy diet. So they should really take macro and micronutrients adequately into account, and also take into account, to the extent possible, household composition. What we see in reality is that most expenditure baskets, so be it a minimum food basket or a minimum expenditure basket, they are primarily focused on the energy needs. So they're based on an energy-based diet, and they insufficiently reflect the micronutrient requirements of households and individuals. And of course, the same goes for the transfer amount. The transfer amount should be based on the expenditure basket, and should then allow to access a nutritious diet if that is part of the objective. Good. Quick time check. Yes. Then step 5, mobilize resources for the response. There's not a lot of cash and voucher specificity here, but you can read up the details in the guidance. Same with implementation. No real difference to any other CVA implementation, I would say. Then monitoring, there's certain nutrition specific considerations there. So nutrition outcomes largely depend on program objectives, and they're not tied to the assistance modality. So the objectives don't necessarily change whether you use cash and vouchers or something else. One thing that is important to note is that if CVA is provided to give access to a healthy and diverse diet, then you need to move beyond household level indicators and include indicators and at the individual level. Often, certainly as part of, from the food security angle, we see that projects fail to measure the impact at the level of the mother or the child, so dietary diversity, etc. And that just doesn't give enough detail in terms of assessing the impact on child and maternal nutrition, because it doesn't reflect the intra-household dynamics and how the food is distributed within the household. One more thing that needs to be looked at certainly is expenditure information, so how the money is spent. This is particularly relevant for nutrition, I think, because in order to achieve nutrition outcomes, the money needs to be spent on goods and services that are relevant to nutrition outcomes. So if you see that the money is spent on other things, which might be valid expenditure, but might not contribute to nutrition outcomes, then there's certainly a problem in terms of achieving these nutrition outcomes. And that's also why a strong context-specific social and behavioral change component is so necessary. Cross-cutting issues, preparedness, certainly extremely relevant in contexts where crises are relatively predictable, and all the things that I just presented you can also do at preparedness stage based on scenarios that you develop. Coordination, certainly very important from the perspective of the global nutrition cluster. Close coordination between the relevant axes is extremely important for cash and vouchers for nutrition outcomes, because, as I mentioned, a lot of information is already available. There's a lot of learning that needs to be happening between the sectors and also between cash practitioners. And one more thing to keep in mind: if the cash and voucher component as part of the nutrition response should be coordinated by the nutrition cluster and sector. So if there is a cash and voucher component as part of a broader nutrition response, then nutrition cluster or the sector needs to take also the ownership of that more strongly. Information management, similar point here. If there is a cash and voucher component of a nutrition response, then that should be reported on the nutrition cluster. Risk analysis and mitigation is here, we put it under cross-cutting because it really is, you find risk analysis and mitigation in the different steps. We all know, or most of us know, that CVA modalities are not riskier than other modalities, and that many risks in regards at programmatic level are not specific to CVA, but are more specific to the fact that we assist. Yeah. Nevertheless, there is some CVA specific risks that need to be considered. We talked about one in relation to providing cash to caregivers who bring their children for SAM, for the treatment of severe acute malnutrition. Yeah. And in general, I think it's important to pay particular attention to protection risks as well. Now, so this is really the last couple of slides were, as I explained, how to consider CVA as a cash and voucher assistance as part of a nutrition response. Now, this slide is really looking at how to apply a stronger nutrition lens to a cash-based, most of the time basic needs, potentially a food security response. Yeah. And here the main focus is on household cash transfers, which are increasingly provided in the form of multi-purpose cash. Now, remember from 20 minutes ago that household cash transfers alone should not be expected to contribute to nutrition outcomes of individual household members. Yeah? But there is different measures that can be taken to increase the likelihood that they do. And one of them, and of course they overlap with some of what I said before. One important measure is to integrate context-specific social and behavioral change with household cash transfers. A second one is to appropriately reflect nutrition in the minimum expenditure basket and transfer amount calculation. Yeah? So people need to have sufficient funds at the month, for example, at the monthly on a monthly basis, in order to make the expenditures that allows them to improve their nutrition. Then also in regards to targeting, to choosing nutrition sensitive targeting criteria. So for example, focusing specifically at risk groups to malnutrition. So pregnant lactating women, children under the age of 2, under the age of 5, etc. So these at risk groups, they can be categorically targeted, or they at least can maybe be one of the targeting criteria that is taking into consideration in a multi-purpose cash response, for example. And then also, if the analysis shows that such a response can actually contribute to nutrition outcomes, then of course to include nutrition objectives and indicators in the project design. And we'll see from later on an example from Colombia that has used MPC, but has complemented it with different measures to also try to better achieve sectoral outcomes. Now, the last part of the guidance note is actually the recommendations. And I'm not going to go too much into detail here, but for your information, there's recommendations to the nutrition cluster and sector coordination teams, to nutrition practitioners and partners, to the global nutrition cluster and the global technical assistance mechanism, the GTAM, to cash practitioners and cash working groups, and to donors. And overall, the key messages are look out for economic barriers to adequate nutrition, consider CVA modalities if there are important economic barriers, coordinate and collaborate among sectors and with cash working groups, build programs based on a thorough understanding of the context, of causes and of barriers to adequate nutrition, and also the current best practice of using CVA for nutrition outcomes, which is reflected in the document that we're launching today. And then I think in general, it needs to build capacity of nutrition practitioners on CVA. I think that's certainly a lot that needs to happen at that level. Good. That was it for the presentation. Just checking the time. Okay. Anna, maybe you can support me on the Q&A.
Sure. We have two questions from Alan Bosa in Q&A section. I just received the third one. Do you want me to read them or you prefer to read yourself?
Yeah, maybe you read them for also everybody's attention.
Okay. So the first question, health and transportation services typically is not included in a cash feasibility assessment. Do you consider this component to be specific for CVA for nutrition outcomes? Shouldn't this be included in the market assessment rather than a cash feasibility assessment?
Okay, so yes, I mean, I think, okay, just move down the question. So health, I mean, typically you do have health service assessments that exist that are certainly done by the health sector or by the health cluster in a country. I think it's important to take that into account. In general, if we aim to improve access to health and nutrition services, from a nutrition perspective, I think it's incredibly important to coordinate that well with the health sector. So there is tools out there. It might be done. We might not be aware of it. Yeah. And the second part of the question was, so moving a little bit.
Shouldn't this be included in the market assessment rather than a cash feasibility assessment?
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, market assessment is so feasibility assessment considers many different things, and market assessment is certainly one of them. So market assessment is often done before the feasibility assessment, but the findings of the market assessment or the assessment of health services or whatever it is informs the feasibility assessment. So they're so closely interlinked that I don't think there is a need to distinguish the two. Yeah. I think as part of the guidance, I think that's just where it fits best in step 2.
Next question, also from Alan, regarding coordination. By the nutrition cluster coordinating or leading the CVA components as part of a nutrition response, doesn't this create parallel work streams? How do you mitigate the risk of parallel efforts because the cash working group and the nutrition cluster?
Yeah, but I think, I mean, that's the same for other sectoral interventions as well. If organizations use cash and vouchers, for example, to reconstruct houses, then that certainly would be coordinated within, at least from my understanding, within the shelter sector or cluster. And the same goes for nutrition, I would say. And as I mentioned, like extremely important to closely coordinate and collaborate between, in this case, the nutrition sector and the cash working group. And I think, I mean, local solutions for the best setup certainly need to be found. Yeah, but this coordination in many contexts doesn't necessarily work at this stage very well, also because there's not a lot of cash and vouchers being used for nutrition outcomes. So I think if we see an increase in the use, we will also see an uptake of the coordination between the relevant bodies on the ground.
Okay, so the question from Chris. You highlight the importance of integrated nutrition into MAPs and CTV calculations. What might this look like in practice? Ensuring that food baskets are nutritionally balanced, explicitly integrating the cost of accessing treatment services. Something else?
Yeah, again, depending on the objective, yeah, but in general for an MEB, which is looking at primarily basic needs. Certainly the food component is extremely important to look at, and there to have the food component to reflect a healthy and nutritious and diverse diet, I think is key. Depending on the barriers that you identify, other expenditures might be also extremely important in relation, for example, to water, sanitation, and hygiene, and in relation to other things that we might not foresee. And then for health, yes, certainly transportation is an important one. Now, treatment of malnutrition as well as preventative health services usually should be provided for free. So normally there is no need, and we have to be careful of giving money to actually pay for these services, but normally they should be provided for free. So transportation is something I think important to keep in mind if you identify that as a barrier. Yeah. So I think it's really food, non-food, access to health services. These are probably the most important components, or the most nutrition relevant components of an MEB.
The next question is from Naziha. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. How do you consider the gender-based decision-making in households? We know that women are preparing food, but generally it's men who receive the cash from aid assistance and who make the decision. Does the guidance note give some recommendations to ensure that right decisions are made in the household?
It does. So whoever posed that question, you are encouraged to read the guidance and the evidence as well. So I think that is something important, and it's actually an extremely important point, that usually CVA is provided to the head of household, which is usually a man, while nutrition interventions are often targeted towards women and children. I think it's the whole household decision making is something that needs to be looked at the feasibility stage, and needs to be incorporated into the design and planning of the intervention. So if you see that men are the primary decision makers, then the project or the response needs to take that into account, and needs to maybe have a conversation and outreach to the men in order to see, you know, how what are maybe some of the things that some of the activities, some of the supplementary activities that could happen. For example, social and behavioral change activities that could encourage joint decision making at household level, that makes men understand the importance of certain expenditures and a certain allocation of foods and other things within the households for better nutrition of the family, etc. So this needs to be incorporated from the very beginning, and then also integrated into the design of the response. Yeah. But from my experience, often, I mean, in some contexts, it's true that it's always the men that decide, but in others, actually, it's a lot of joint decision making as well. Yeah.
The question from Luca, first part is very similar, but I will still read the full question. Are there evidences regarding who to give money to within a household? For example, would giving it to women in context where women are traditionally at home better support nutritional outcomes than giving it to heads of households, probably men?
Yeah.
But the first part of the question, how does this compare with food security as opposed to nutrition?
Yeah. There is the evidence base is not very strong, but I think overall it does point in the direction that for nutrition, and probably the same for food security, because that's probably the pathway that might be in these contexts most relevant, giving it to the women or to the caregiver is a good idea. Yeah. But we also know from some examples, for example from the DRC, that where they looked at that in a specific project, and it didn't actually matter whether you gave it to the men or to the women in terms of nutrition outcomes. So I think in general, it's a good idea to try to give it to the women, but again, you need to look at the risks of that approach as well. So if you give it to the women without consulting the men, and then the men might get upset, etc., you might actually cause harm and create tension within the household. So as part of the design, as part of the community outreach, these things need to be looked at and need to be explored and then addressed in the design, I would say. Yeah. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
The last question we have is, will we receive the recording and presentation after the webinar?
Yes, as already mentioned, it will be posted on the GNC website, and then we will also circulate it in on the CalpD group and maybe other relevant distribution mechanisms.
And we just received one more question. I hope we still have time.
Yeah.
In the context of COVID, with disruptions in food systems, especially supply chains, and yet more needs for nutritional foods in building immunity, especially in children in PLWs, how can we ensure that the most vulnerable, economically and nutritionally, are able to access diverse foods as part of CVA?
Okay.
Basically, what are the implications of the COVID on the CVA?
Yeah. So that's a tricky one. I mean, in general, I think COVID certainly has proven to be able to disrupt supply chains of within food systems. If that is the case, and if the analysis finds that nutritious and healthy foods are not adequately available in the local market, then CVA is not the right response. So then I think to work on the supply side, to strengthen supply chains, to reestablish them, to work with producers maybe and traders, etc., is probably recommended as a first response. And once we see that the market is in a has sufficient capacity to supply these nutritious foods, then the CVA approach can be taken into consideration. Yeah. But yeah, you do depend on the supply side completely for CVA to work. So it's extremely important that market assessment are done with vigor and especially on nutritious foods, that this is analyzed properly. Yeah.
Okay. So
Good.
we have no more questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Anna. Okay, so let me quickly go back to the agenda. Okay, so as you can see, we now finished with the presentation and the Q&A section. The next session is experience and initiatives from the field, and we will start with Nigeria, where ACF.
Andre?
Yeah.
Sorry, we see your desktop, I assume, not the presentation.
Okay. Let me quickly try to fix that. Okay. Let me then directly jump to ACF. Huh? So I see already that Anil is online. Anil is going to be able to introduce himself in a second, but we will start with the example from Nigeria. Anil, do you want me to show the slides?
Can you please open the slides, because
yes, I will. Yeah. Now, can you quickly confirm that? 1 second. I will share the screen, and can you see that, Anil?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Excellent. So you just tell me when to press to change the slides. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Henry, and for this opportunity. And it is my great pleasure to present the case studies and some evidence of cash and voucher assistance for the nutrition outcomes in emergencies from the Nigeria mission as well. So can you please go through the next slide?
Sure.
So this case study actually is coming from one of our integrated project. We call it INP Plus, and that project was funded by US. That project was funded by UK DFID. So I will not take more time on the humanitarian overview of humanitarian crisis in the northeast Nigeria, because we all are familiar with the crisis since the beginning of insurgency, and it has been like 12 years, which has resulted the poor conditions of malnutrition, food insecurity, and other lack of access to the safe water and sanitations, and most probably, by this, crisis, women, especially the pregnant and lactating women and the children, are on the top of the, risk, and which are facing, a lot of challenges in terms of the different diverse needs, which are very associated with the nutrition and food security as well. So as for now, almost 7.1 million people are in diverse need of humanitarian assistance, and 1.8 million people who are affected by the conflict, and also they are displaced as well. And especially when we are talking about the humanitarian response in the northeast Nigeria, so there are, three different states. We call it Bono, Yobe, and Adamawa state, which are, a epicenter of the insurgency, and which has actually resulted a lot of insurgency. So there are more than 1 million children between the age of 6 months and 5 years are acutely malnutrition, across the affected area. So I am talking about, these three states. So as per, different evidence and different reports, 1 in 5 children has a severe acute malnutrition, and 1 in 15 children are found with the moderate acute malnutrition and are at the risk of death if untreated. So this is, a picture of the humanitarian response in the northeast Nigeria. Please, can you go through, change the slide? So, so as Andre had, discussed a lot of our CVA on the nutrition outcomes. So I am going to give you a good picture of the design of the project. We have actually 2 projects. We call it INP Plus, which was, concluded in 2018 and 19, and then we have a Sunny project as well. Actually, the objective of that project is it is a nutrition sensitive project with integrated approaches. So we have, injected cash and voucher assistance for that emergency response, and that is a kind of emergency response for the cash transfer for programming, and also that has a development, some aspects, some touches, so that how we are going to complete the nutrition outcomes. So this is a multi-sectorial project with the health and nutrition, and we have also embedded a social protection, cash transfer, and food security, livelihood, and wash and health, sectors. The objective of this project is to strengthen the components in different 3 LGAs of Yobe state. So all components of this projects are integrated to ensure the positive nutrition outcomes. So we have embedded WASH, we have embedded, food security, and some saving social protection components to embedded the part to come up with the nutrition objective, outcomes. So and SEF, like we have a different projects in the northeast Nigeria where we are implementing cash for the nutrition objectives. We are we are also trying to create some behavioral change and some positive, gestures for, some nutrition food modalities, so that we can achieve this objective. So for this project, we are supporting some 10,000 households in different layers of the activities where we are implementing cash for nutrition outcomes. Can you please change the slide? Yeah, so actually the approach in the methodology is that we have a monthly cash transfer of Nigerian 5,000, which is very equivalent to the 13 USD 13 or the GBP 11 to the pregnant and lactating women for the maximum period of 33 months. So we are counting, the days of 1,000 days from the first first month of the pregnancy, so that we are initially, crossing these all beneficiaries from different LGAs in the Yobe state. So currently we have an Nagare LGA where we are implementing this project. So this is a very important, part of the discussion for this evidence, that the cash, how we are registering this benefit. These beneficiaries are usually registered at the health facilities, and this is one of the key condition, conditionality of the having beneficiaries for the cash transfer program as well, because we are actually, promoting the access to the health services, and we are also promoting, some sensitization on health and ICU and nutrition key messages. These are the, key points of the, conditionality, so that, pregnant and lactating women have adequate information on their nutrition outcome. So we have also embedded, because CVA is alone and access to the health facility as alone cannot, come up with the outcomes of the nutrition. So we have also embedded wash and wash component in that project, and by providing some hygiene promotion, baby wash, med complementary feeding, atom cups, like these are the actually, some atoms and some wash related things which are embedded in this project. And secondly, we have also rehabilitated some water points, and we have also some CLTS approach and campaigns for the open defecations. And then we are also transitioning some beneficiaries from those beneficiaries who are pregnant and lactating women and who are actually receiving the cash assistance through our CVA, and we are shifting those beneficiaries to the some sort of sustainability by engaging them in farm and feed schools, because nutrition objective is also associated with the advocate food security. So farmer feed school approaches are also embedded. And for the benefit, because as I already mentioned that pregnant and lactating women are targeted for this cash transfer programming, and for their head of household, usually they are the men. So we have also engaged them in the cash for work activities. And then this is a triangulation between from one activity to another activity, and then we embedded village saving and loan activities for the graduation once the graduation is completed. So, and we have also recruited, and we are paying also 115 doctors, nurses, and community health workers who are placed in different health services. And the very key point I am going to mention here is that all the money mobile money agents, the mobile outlets are suited uh, in the health centers, because this is a kind of motivation, this is a kind of some sort of mobilization that beneficiary, a woman pregnant and lactating women should come to the health centers, for their for screening up, and they can also receive the cash transfer. And for the second visit, they will also receive some cost for the transportation. This is also means of supporting, because there has been a different discussion on CVA that how we are going to facilitate beneficiary in terms of the transportation cost as well. Yes, can you please change the slide? So the objective of this cash transfer is to ensure the food security and CVA to pregnant and lactating women, prevent malnutrition and stunting in the children, as I already discussed this, and reduce morbidity and mortality of infant and under 5 children, because this is an opportunity actually, because these beneficiaries, these households are have faced a lot of stress, and they came up with a different stigma, and due to this insurgency and the crisis. So this is an opportunity for the beneficiaries to receive the cash assistance at the health centers, and they are actually with a very respectable and dignified ways. And then we are also promoting health and nutrition status and general well-being of vulnerable beneficiaries. We are providing some health related education sessions. We are also providing some a complete comprehensive nutrition and health services, so that, and this is also creating a linkage between the health department, health services, and also the local beneficiaries and local in this area, and the village leaders. Please change the slide. Yes, challenges. Yes, challenges. So sometimes when we are, because it is a part of SMAB, and when we have to also follow the cash working group guidelines for the household level expenditure basket. So household diversity may not be achieved on a sustainable basis due to the inflation and large family size of household, because we are here targeting, actually our main objective of targeting is the pregnant and lactating women and their one children. And we have developed the amount for transfer value based on this, but due to the inflation and due to the because cash is actually used for those pregnant and lactating women, but sometimes you cannot control on the expenditures. So some, as per PDMs and some other findings, this is one of the key challenge we are facing in this project. And then inadequate investment by the government in the procurement, RUTF, and the complementary, because the areas where we are operating government services are still in terms of we are facing some sort of challenges in this, so that we have reflected here. And then delay by government and demonstration funding and implementation of food and nutrition policy, because we are also working very closely with the government for the food and nutrition policy, and also with the social protection policy, and this is kind of one of the challenge in this project. Yes, please.
Yes, Anil, you have 2 more minutes, huh? Thanks.
Yeah, just. Okay. And the learning, I will try to finish in 2 minutes. NP led to increase uptake and utilization of basic health services and indicators such as under 5 mortality rate, exclusive breakfast, and minimum and acceptable diet for the children household. They said that is also one of the key learning. And then, specific with the cash transfer component, increase antenatal care attendance, which has resulted increase in the proportion of women who received iron and folate supplement in the pregnancy. This is one of the key points, of learning of the cash transfer programming when we are talking about these beneficiaries. Or can you please change? And then I will also, like the population based on the experimental measures, GEM for the children and 059 across the intermediate appear not to have any improved. The cash assistance actually caused disharmony in some families at the initial period of the implementation, especially in the Naga, because wives suddenly earning and share their money with them. This is the, some sort of the learning we have in this project. Please change. Can you change? Thank you so much. This is all from our side. Over.
Thank you very much, Anil, for this interesting presentation. We will, if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A. We will now continue directly with the next presentation, and we're going to Colombia to save the children. We have Andrea Garcia and Julia Grasse on the line. And please, both of you go ahead and please introduce yourself very briefly to the audience. Thank you, and I will open the slides now. Andrea and Julia, are you there?
Hello, yes.
Excellent.
Julia was having some trouble. I don't know if she's now here.
Okay.
Here.
Okay. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. So please go ahead. Please introduce yourself and then go ahead.
Sure. Hi everyone, my name is Julia. I'm a cash and FSL TA at Save the Children US, and I've been supporting the Venezuela response, including Colombia, for the past years.
Hello, my name is Andrea Garcia. I am Nutrition Coordinator with Save the Children Colombia.
All right, so I'm going to start with a very quick introduction to the context. If you could pass to the next slide, please. All right, so when we started working in Colombia as part of the Venezuela response in 2018, there were around 1.4 million Venezuelans that were estimated in Colombia fleeing the political and economic turmoil inside of Venezuela. On an average, there were about 5,000 people that were estimated to be crossing the border on a daily basis. So we were operating in a context of massive displacement, and also a very complex one, as Venezuelans were arriving in areas of Colombia that were already affected by conflict. So this created a very complex situation to respond to. We conducted some needs assessment and identified that priority needs were around protection, shelter, food security, and nutrition, as well as wash. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to give a quick presentation of the project in a slide. Thanks. So we implemented 2 projects. So the first one was a Multi-Purpose Cash Plus program funded by OFDA and FFP. We implemented it in 2 areas at the border with Venezuela, in 2 informal settlements between September 2018 and 2019. So the program was designed as follows. We had a component of Multi-Purpose Cash Plus that was provided to over 13,000 Venezuelan and Colombia. That was composed of 3 months of multi-purpose cash assistance and 2 months of cash assistance that were designed and calculated to cover only food needs. This program, this multi-purpose cash program, was also complemented by nutrition activities as well as child protection activities, more specifically provision of psychosocial support through child-friendly spaces and case management. Andrea will provide you more information afterwards on the nutrition activities specifically. Next slide, please. So very briefly, the way that we calculated the cash transfer amounts is we basically understood that whenever Venezuelans were arriving in country, they had absolutely no source of income and they weren't arriving with any savings and spent some time before finding an income generating activity. So we decided to calculate the minimum cost that a household would require in order to meet basic needs in Colombia. So we looked at the cost of food, the cost of shelter, the cost of hygiene products, transportation, as well as purchase of basic sleeping kits and basic cooking kits. And based on this, we determined the amount to be transferred on a monthly basis to beneficiaries. Next slide, please. The second phase of the program started in October 2019 and was slightly different in the sense that first it expanded to urban areas as well. We started working in Bogota and Cali, so no longer only informal settlements. And the way that the cash transfer was calculated and designed was slightly different because starting from that moment on, the government of Colombia decided to standardize the cash transfer amounts for all NGOs and align it slightly with their social protection transfers amounts. Andrea, I'm going to let you talk a little bit more about nutrition.
Okay, thank you, Julia. Well, the objectives of nutrition component inside all the cash programming are 2. The first one is prevent malnutrition through the promotion and support of the 4 IYCF practices, and the second, prevent the risk associated to cash delivery for children, such as the purchase of BMS or inadequate foods as of 6 months of life of children. Next slide, please. I am going to make a general explanation of how the phase 1 was integrating the nutrition component. So in this phase, the reference of possible cash beneficiaries was made by 3 ways: from allies, from other Save the Children components, such as health or protection, and direct targeting. To help make an adequate reference, there were 10 vulnerability criteria. After the reference, the cash team made a characterization per household, and depending on the vulnerability scored, the households were classified in households that were not eligible for cash assistance and the eligible for cash assistance. The nutrition activities began with the enrollment of cash beneficiaries after all the process of reference and characterization. The first contact of the beneficiaries with the nutrition component was in an initial sensitization that was carried out in the cash enrollment session. Once the enrollment for cash was done, the meal team searched in the database for households with pregnant women or children under 2 years of age, and the nutrition team called them by phone to invite them to the IYCF workshops. Next slide, please. In the second phase, we add to the ways of reference to cash some nutrition activities, such as the support groups and individual counseling. These both activities are planned inside the breastfeeding corners. The nutrition activities turn in this second phase to the community and not only for cash beneficiaries. That means that if a member of the nutrition staff detects one or more of the 10 criteria of vulnerability, he or she can make the reference, and this member of a household can pass through the process of characterization to define if his or her household can be eligible for cash assistance, and arrive to the sensitization and IYCF workshops. We also add the nutritional screening as a way of reference to cash, but before making it, we establish a via of reference in case of detection of cases of SAM or MAM, since Save the Children does not offer treatment for these conditions in the Venezuelan crisis response. Before we started with the nutritional screening, we established in the SOP that cash is not the treatment for SAM or MAM, and responding to child safeguarding principles, it is established that cases of SAM or MAM will not be directly referred to cash team for characterization. The reference to the cash component will be done only if in the nutritional screening is found risk of malnutrition or other vulnerability criteria previously established in the cash SOP. Julia, please.
Okay, so I'm going to briefly talk about the impact of the project. So we looked, we measured various types of indicators. Here I'm just going to focus on the profile of the beneficiary selected, as well as food security and then nutrition. So as you can see, we targeted a vast proportion of our beneficiaries were women, including women-headed households, pregnant and lactating women, and families with numerous children, including children under 5 that were almost 60%, and children under 2 that were around 35%. Next slide, please. So looking at food security indicators, as you can see, before the startup of the program, we measured the household hunger score, and we found that over almost 58% of households were in a moderate situation, and 14% were facing severe hunger. And after the cash program, we saw a massive positive impact where almost over 90% of our beneficiaries were no longer suffering from hunger. Next slide, please. Same pattern for reduced coping strategy index. At the beginning, we basically looked at different categories, and we found that almost 80% of our beneficiaries were either into a crisis, emergency, or catastrophic situation, whereas at the end, almost 80% were no longer into a phase classification. So that really shows that the program had a very positive impact on food security. Now over to you, Andrea, for nutrition.
Thank you, Julia. Well, in the nutrition component, before the program, 23% of children between 0 and 5 months old were being exclusively breastfed, and the 12% of children between 6 and 23 months were consuming 4 or more food groups. After the program, the proportion of children exclusively breastfed doubled to 46%, and the proportion of children receiving more than 4 food groups increased to 20%. Next, please. Julia, can you help me with this?
You have 1 more minute.
Okay,
Sure.
I'll do it.
Yes.
No, you. Yeah, you.
Okay, so we conducted a case study to analyze a little bit all of those aspects and impact. So the MPCA demonstrated a very high impact on beneficial household food security and positive impact on children between 6 and 23 months dietary diversity. However, we also found out that the way that the monitoring system that we had set up didn't allow for the measurement of specifics to PLW's food security and nutritional status. So one of the recommendations that came out from the first phase of the program was that in future MPCA plus nutrition program to consider specific first kilocalorie and micronutrient needs of pregnant and lactating women, as well as children between 6 and 23 months in the design of the food basket. The way we designed the food basket was standardized per capita and didn't differentiate between pregnant women, men, or children. Another recommendation was to include an individual indicator of food security and nutrition for pregnant and lactating women in order to enable a better measurement of MPCA impacts on their food security and nutrition. And to include as well some additional indicators for children between 6 and 23 months. Some suggestions were minimum feeding frequency, minimum acceptable diet, consumption of iron-rich or iron-fortified foods, and also to include in our PDMs tracking of potential purchase of milk infant formula.
Okay, the next, please. And here we have something about the nutrition component. The IYC activities should be started at the beginning of the program. We are doing now like this. As part of community mobilization activities, we should insert the IYCF to the community, as I told you that we're doing in the second phase, and we should reinforce the technical training of MPCA teams like community mobilizers or enumerators in the identification of children victims or at risk of malnutrition. And that's all. The next slide, please. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Julia and Andrea, for this interesting presentation. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over directly to Kalp and to Save the Children for their West Africa experiences. So Natalie and Diane, please go ahead. I'm going to open your slides right now. Natalie and Diane, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay,
so
great.
I will start. My name is Diane Moyer, and I'm the Regional Nutrition Advisor for Save the Children based in Dakar. So I will start, and then we'll take my colleague Natalie will take over.
Can you see the slides?
No, not yet. We can just see your office desk.
Okay. Try that again. Can you see it now?
Yep. Perfect.
Oh, wait.
So I'm gonna talk about this tool. We have been working with CALP and French Red Cross for the past 2 years. So actually, what was the genesis of the tools was the first observation that in Western and Central Africa, we are noticing that there's the highest case of prevalence and caseload of undernutrition. We know that there's proven impact, as Andre said before, of CVA on nutrition outcome and determinant of malnutrition. At the same time, there's a growing use of cash voucher in Western and Central Africa, but we are not seeing it being used for nutrition. And also, we do not see nutrition actor as feeling confident to use CVA for nutrition programming. So the first observation was we really need to step up and increase the nutrition capacity in using for nutrition actor and using CVA for nutrition programming. Next, please. Andre?
Can you see it?
No. Can you put it full screen as well?
It is full screen. Can others see it? Can I get some feedback, please?
It doesn't show full screen.
Okay, let me just try to open it again. What about now?
Yeah,
Yep.
it's good now.
Okay.
So now I would like to discuss about why nutrition actors feel shy about CVA. So we have made some observation in the field when we are supporting our country teams, when we are exchanging between ourselves. So very often the questions that come up is, as a nutrition actor, is why should I be involved? Like, why should I bother knowing about cash or doing cash for nutrition? So very often we have seen that nutrition actors tend to think that cash, I mean, CVA is a food security tool. They don't see it as a mainstream tool. And even though we are noticing also that in most of NGO and most of country teams, the position of cash expert and the position of FSA expert is being merged. There's no standalone across sector cash experts. So meaning that we don't have someone that can appropriately support all sector in objective manners. And what we are observing as well is most of the training, whether it's CALP or ICRC led, are rarely attended by nutrition actors. Most of the time is more food security or cash expert. Second question we are saying is, we are observing is, do I think CVA will really help my program? So there's a lot of evidence. I mean, Andre already presented everything. We saw 2 case studies on the impact of cash on nutrition. But because there's no, because the nutrition actor are not trained on it, or sometimes there's no cash expert on the staff in the country, the nutrition actor, they will not know how the cash can help their program. They will think that they are not able to do it or they cannot do it. So very often what we are saying is a nutrition team or country team will turn down an opportunity to do cash for nutrition because they think they don't know how to do it, or they think it will not be appropriate. And again, the last question was, should we do CVA as a standalone approach or the complement of nutrition intervention? As this was highlighted before, CVA is a tool. It's something we should use to reach an outcome. It's not a standalone sector. It's not a standalone sector. So what we want is we want a nutrition actor to know how to build combined interventions. How we want to. It's not only like having cash on one side and nutrition on another side. It's like how we want to do it. And what we are saying as of now is, for health and for shelter, there is position paper on how and when you want to use cash, but it wasn't existing for nutrition up till now. And also there was no existing tools. So that means if I am a nutritionist in a country and I want to use cash, how do I do it? So that's why we came up with the decision to think and to design decision-making tools for the use of cash for nutrition programming. And now I'm going to hand over to Natalie, my colleague from CALP, that will tell you a bit more about the process.
Thank you, Diane. So my name is Natalie Clark. I'm normally based in Dakar, currently in France, the regional rep for CALP for West and Central Africa. And so we've been working on the development of the tool also with the French Red Cross that's with us today. So the process started, as Diane just said, 2 years ago. So it was an initial brainstorming initiated by Save the Children at regional level to see how we could scale up, like what were the barriers to the scale up of CVA for nutrition in the region. We thought that it would be good to have a meeting with CVA practitioners and nutrition practitioners at regional level to really share perspectives. And so we had a joint meeting of the regional nutrition and cash working groups in September 2018 to try to identify those barriers and see if we could come up with a common understanding of what prevented nutrition actors to really embrace CVA as a potential modality to address malnutrition. So we came up at the end of this meeting with a sort of an action plan with different actors committing to advance on some different initiatives like mapping CVA for nutrition, documenting initiatives, sharing evidence and so on. And we set up a restricted technical team for the development of the tool because, as Diane just said, the gap of practical tools that could really speak to field practitioners was identified as a key thing. As CVA practitioners, we know that there are a plethora of tools and guidance out there, but the fact that they are often designed in a in the best way, neutral way, or on the worst way, a food security perspective, it really prevents, we know some sector experts to use those tools and to update them. So a very practical decision-making tool was for us the best way to sensitize nutrition actors and to progressively drive them to get to know more what could be the entry points for CVA in malnutrition, and to help them navigate and identify what could be the entry points and how to design a CVA to achieve nutrition outcomes. So we set up that technical team with the Red Cross, Save the Children, and CAP, and we had a steering committee comprising ECHO, Food for Peace, UNICEF, and WFP to give us some technical insights and to agree on what would be the skeleton of the tool and what would be the purpose of that tool, what it would cover, and so on. So we identify 3 key steps for these tools that really reflect, mirror the steps that André presented in the guidance, but in a more condensed way. So instead of 6 steps, we actually came up with 3 steps, which are really focusing on identify, is cash appropriate? Can it address or contribute to address the issues of malnutrition in my specific operational context? Then is it feasible? And then how do I design it to make it really nutrition specific or nutrition sensitive, and to achieve the objectives of my programs? When we identify and we draw the skeleton of the tool, we hired a consultant to do all the literature review. What we wanted, and it was the time where the global cluster hired André and started to really work on the development of the guidance. So we didn't really want to come up with a full literature review or to have a guidance per se, because we didn't want to make field practitioners think that there is a ready-to-use method for cash in nutrition. We wanted to highlight that this should remain really context-specific, to think about the specific factors for malnutrition in their context, and that what may have worked with cash in one context may not apply to theirs. But still, we led this literature review to make sure that the direction and the steps we put on the tools are based on facts and evidence. So we initially included them in the tool, and then we took them out because we thought that it was very nicely complementing the guidance. And so for people who really want to have more exhaustive and comprehensive view of existing evidence and experience on CVA for malnutrition, they should refer to the guidance rather than that tool, which is much more for field practitioners and decision making. So we had several, of course, steps of tools development. We ended up with a validation at regional level. We shared it also, collaborated with André and the cluster to make sure that both tools are are on the same line. Okay, are on the same line, but also complementing nicely each other. And so now we are at the step of disseminating that tool along with the guidance and promoting it and piloting it. So André, next slide, please. So as I just said, now we would like as many practitioners in all regions to use that tool. We will particularly focus in West and Central Africa to see how regional practitioners are using it, but please do send us feedback. You can find the tool on CALP's website. What we need, of course, is to do further sensitization, because people will only access the tool if they have a primary interest in getting to know more about CVA for malnutrition. And we know that that tool with the guidance may not be sufficient, and that we will need to do further technical support and capacity building, as highlighted by André and Diane, for actors at field level. And we deeply think that cash working groups and clusters at national level, as highlighted by Andre too in the guidance, should work together to make sure that this technical expertise is available for national practitioners. That's it on our side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. And that was great. So we have 8 more minutes for the panel. It's going to be a short panel, I think, but it was good to give enough space to the 3 presenters also to share their experiences from the field and from regions. I think that was extremely relevant. So Anna, maybe you want to support the Q&A session? Anna, are you there?
Hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Hello?
Yes, yeah, I can hear you. And
Sorry.
all the people that presented, please be on standby for questions.
So I only so far see 2 questions, and both of them for Nigeria. So while I'm reading and we are answering, if anybody else have questions, do type them in. So the questions are, how can you ensure and maintain sustainability of such project? I'm not sure, Andre, if you would also like to take this question, or if it's just for Nigeria. And the second question was for Nigeria. In terms of the amount of cash transfer, whether it varies if it's adolescent, pregnant lactating woman, healthy pregnant lactating woman, or malnourished PLW.
Okay, I think these are, let's hand them over to Anil first, and then maybe I can say something about sustainability. Anil, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so let me go to the first question in terms of the sustainability, because the health infrastructure is very diverse in the Northeast Nigeria, and we are trying our best to create linkages between the communities with the health services. And we are also actually we have signed actually MOUs as well, and we have shared different sources, and also some means of communication, channels to how they can once the project will be completed and completed, how the sustainability of that intervention and sustainability of linkages between the health services and community will be established. So all efforts have been taken place in this project, and that is also a part of advocacy and also some policy level documents as well in this project. And secondly, there was also another question about the the amount specific with the adolescent women. We did a very in-depth research, and we did also consulted with the cash working group in Nigeria. So the amount as for now is equal and same for all of the beneficiaries. We have not distinguished this with the pregnant lactating women and adults, because this amount is covering this type of the targeting targeting what we call it, the targeting as well. So over from my side.
Okay, thank you, Anil. Just on sustainability, I think yeah, I mean, different perspectives on sustainability. Obviously, if it's sustainability of, for example, of households having a constant stream of income, if that is what you mean, I think one intervention could certainly be income generating activities, but I think ACF actually did that. So there was follow-up activities that allowed households and pregnant and lactating women to generate incomes through different measures. Exactly. And the other one is really to look at, or another important one is to look at the existence of safety nets, of government-led safety nets, and maybe to advocate whether such safety nets could be extended to, or could be, a stronger nutrition lens could be applied, and they could be extended, for example, to pregnant and lactating women, or to even to cover the first 1,000 days, which in certain contexts actually already do exist. I'm not sure whether that would be a feasible approach in Northeast Nigeria, where state services are certainly not at its best. but in general, that could also be one important approach.
So we just received one more question, and probably will be last question considering the timing. I'm not sure to whom this question is, so feel free to answer. Based on the recommendations on integrating costs for nutritional outcomes in the map, in the reality this is very difficult, as normally integrating code or other amounts increase the value highly, and it goes too far away from alignment with social protection amounts or government guidelines, etc. So we normally do a compromise and calculate based on an individual top-up. Any reflection on this trade-off?
I can give it a first shot, and then maybe others can supplement. Yeah. So yes, you're absolutely right. I think we all know that the cost of a nutritious diet is by a factor 2 to 4, potentially more expensive than the cost of an energy-based diet. So there is certainly a big difference there. I think it's important, like if we want to achieve nutrition outcomes, I think it's still important to reflect what people should be able to buy. Yeah? And then if we are not able to provide the required amount, then at least that gives us an indication whether we will be able to achieve our objectives. Yeah. But of course, if it's not possible to increase the amounts, even if specific nutrition kind of objectives are included, then I think individual top-ups can be an alternative to an MEB that really fully reflects a nutritious diet for a typical household. So individual top-ups for at-risk groups could then be maybe something that might be easier to implement and easier to sell vis-a-vis donors, but also local authorities, etc. But maybe somebody else from the panel would like to step in and add.
Yes, from my side, actually, when we are talking about the social protection amounts in the country, so when we were developing and designing this project, INP Plus and the Sunny project, and the amount we are actually providing to the pregnant and lactating women, which is a very equivalent, and in line with the social protection policy with the government of Nigeria. So whenever we are developing any program, so it is usually, because there are two aspects. One aspect is that how it is calculated based on the MAB, and secondly, if it is so far away due to the some inflation and other reasons, then we are also tailoring it with the social protection amounts. So this amount, especially in the INP Plus and the Sunny project, is in line and tailored with the social protection amount of Northeast Nigeria. Over.
Okay. Any last word from the panel? Any additional point on that question particularly? Good. Okay. Okay, so I think that's it. It's now exactly 4 p.m. European time. So I would like to thank everybody for the attendance, for the attention span to be with us for 2 hours. I would like to encourage you to consult the document, to have a look at it. Like I said, it's going to be final in the coming week, I would say, with the design stage finishing soon. And if you are a nutrition practitioner or a cash practitioner and you see opportunities to use CVA for nutrition, then give it a try and learn, and then let us know what you're learning, so that we can also update and become better at integrating CVA for nutrition outcomes. Anna, any final words?
No, I don't want to take more time. Thank you so much for the presence, for attendance of the webinar, and please remember that it's just the beginning of our very long road ahead. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.